Hello, and welcome to another Cordie revision session. Today, I'm looking at the CIPS Procurement Cycle, which is a generic business process outlining each of the key stages involved in a typical procurement process. By making the process generic, CIPS has made it applicable to both the public and private sectors throughout all territories of the world. However, you might find that your own organisation has its own specific procedures that don't quite match with this particular cycle of activities. So in this presentation, I am going to explain briefly each of the stages of the CIPS procurement cycle, together with some of the key activities involved, as well as to explain what you need to know for your CIPS exams. So let's start with a generic overview. The CIPS procurement cycle is made up of 13 stages. In effect, it's a linear process with each of the stages operating sequentially, one after the other. You can separate the cycle into two main parts. The first 8 stages deal with all of the typical sourcing activities prior to awarding a contract, while the subsequent stages 9 through to 13 address all activities from contract award through to the end of a contract and its potential renewal beyond. CIPS has developed this cycle for a wide range of goods and services, including capital expenditure, which is why you'll also see reference to assets within this cycle. If you're using the internet to search for a copy of this model, please be aware there are several versions going around, so just be sure that you obtain the latest version. In this video, I'm referring to the 2023 version. Let's start by looking at each of the pre-contract stages. These are stages 1 to 8. Stage 1 is define business need and develop specification. Here, CIPS is outlining the need to engage with stakeholders to understand the potential requirement and to define it by starting to produce a specification. Although it's not explicit in their cycle, here they're really just talking about an initial outline specification, as you'll see later on. Stage 2 refers to market analysis and the make or buy decision. And this is the first real opportunity for procurement to be strategic. Elsewhere on our YouTube channel, you'll find video clips on all manner of market analysis tools. It's at this stage in procurement that these come into their own, prior to stage 3, which is developing the strategy and plan. I always think this sounds very grand, but in essence, a procurement strategy simply means working out the most effective way of obtaining what you need while also meeting the commercial and technical requirements of your own organisation. Stage 4 refers to pre-procurement market testing, where buyers typically undertake market consultation and research about their plans prior to finalising the procurement documentation in the next stage. Now, if it was me, I would normally suggest that pre-procurement market testing follows on from market analysis and is undertaken prior to finalising the strategy and plan. But that's not the order that CIPS is suggesting here. So in stage 5, we now develop the documentation and detailed specification. That means whatever procurement documents are needed to approach the market, so typically an invitation to tender or a request for proposals, for example. Also, just to point out here at stage 5, CIPS is now referring to the detailed specification, which suggests that the initial reference to the specification back in stage 1 was merely an outline spec. Stage 6 now involves selection to participate in the tender. It rather assumes that the approach to a supply market is going to be through tendering, as if this is the default or the only option, which most of us know isn't true. So I think you need to give a little latitude to CIPS here and not take these words too literally. If they really meant that the only procurement method was tendering, then you wouldn't really need a strategy or a plan back in stage 3. So stage 6 is all about identifying and pre-qualifying suitable suppliers, and we have a separate video clip on the use of selection criteria elsewhere on the Cordie YouTube channel. Stage 7 involves the issuing the tender documents, and again the same point applies. This could also be an RFQ or an RFP. It's basically about going out to market to request competitive bids. And finally, stage 8 is the bid and tender evaluation and validation stage, where buyers receive back bids from the market and assess them to find the most competitive. Now, so far, we've reviewed the first 8 stages of the CIPS procurement cycle and worked our way sequentially through all of the key activities required to elicit the best value bid from a competitive market. We'll now move on to the post-contract award and subsequent stages required to manage a contract delivery. So stage 9 is contract award and implementation. This is about going through whatever contract award procedures your organisation requires in its governance, onboarding the supplier and initiating the contract. Now here the CIPS procurement cycle starts to introduce a number of related post-contract award activities that are not necessarily undertaken in sequential order. So stage 10, for example, involves warehousing, logistics and receipt, which obviously applies principally to the supply of goods only. Stage 11 involves contract performance and improvement, which personally speaking, if it was me, I would have these split into 2 separate activities, both of which are considerable in size. In this context, CIPS means contract management when they're referring to contract performance. And then when they're referring to continuous improvement activities, they are referring to contract improvement. It's a massive set of activities and arguably one of the most important of all stages within the procurement cycle. Some would argue that more commercial value is gained or lost at this stage than any other stage in the procurement cycle. After this, stage 12 is supplier relationship management, which is great to see included by CIPS in their procurement cycle. And again, personally, I'd like to see this a little earlier in their cycle of activities, not left to the penultimate activity. The activities in this stage relate to many of our other YouTube revision clips, such as the relationship spectrum, the relationship life cycle, and of course, to partnering. So finally, the last stage in the CIPS procurement cycle is stage 13, asset management, which applies more specifically to high-value capital assets such as buildings, infrastructure and equipment. These assets need maintaining over a longer duration of operation, and so there are longer-term whole-life asset management principles to take into consideration here, although it could be questioned whether this is really now within the remit of procurement. So there you have it, 13 sequential stages representing the generic stages of a typical procurement cycle. If you're studying for your CIPS exams at level 4, then I strongly recommend you memorise each of the stages and make sure you understand what kind of activities should be undertaken at each point. One of the easiest ways of doing this is to split the cycle into the 8 pre-contract stages and the 5 post-contract stages. Now, if you're studying for your CIPS at any of the higher levels, particularly level 6, you will need to be more analytical and more evaluative in your understanding of the CIPS procurement cycle. For example, you might ask challenging questions why most of the cycle appears to assume that tendering is the default procurement approach. And you could also, like I have already hinted, make some challenging observations on their sequencing of activities. But let's take a more positive view. This cycle is a generic cycle of activities that broadly applies to mainstream purchases in most sectors of business throughout the world. It has something for everyone and it broadly complies with most regulatory frameworks for procurement, even if it does lack a little of the necessary detail that's needed for the public sector. Most importantly, it provides procurement departments with an initial framework for their internal procurement processes, and it's therefore a useful starting place for procurement governance. So, I hope you found this helpful. Do remember we have other bite-sized revision clips on the Cordie YouTube channel, and so you might be interested in our single sourcing or our tendering sessions. In the meantime, I wish you the very best with your CIPS exams. Please do remember to like this video and also to subscribe to our channel for more CIPS revision tips. And most of all, thanks for watching.